The desert stretched for 1,000 miles under twin suns, each one a blazing coin in a sky bleached white by heat and dust, where the wind didn't so much blow as scream through the dunes like a dying god. Sand, fine as ground glass, clung to everything: armor, weapons, eyelashes, the cracked lips of the men who stood waiting. They were not soldiers of empire, not heirs to ancient thrones, but survivors, a ragged line of human fighters, their uniforms patched with scavenged alien plating, their faces etched with exhaustion and something deeper, something that looked like resignation, until they saw her. She descended not with thunder, not with fire, but with silence so profound it stole the breath from 1,000 throats. The sky cracked open above them, not with missiles or warp gates, but with a slow, impossible unfurling, like the petals of a black lotus blooming in reverse. The Queen of Vathar emerged from the void in a vessel of living obsidian, shaped like a spine of a fallen star, its surface shifting with veins of cerulean light. She stepped onto the dunes without touching them, hovering 3 feet above the sand as if the very ground feared to hold her. Her skin was the deep indigo of a midnight ocean under a dying moon, smooth and flawless, glowing faintly at the joints where her limbs bent. Her hair, long and liquid as mercury, streamed behind her in slow motion, each strand alive with tiny, pulsing bioluminescent filaments that whispered secrets only the dead could hear. She was tall, taller than any human, taller than any legend, and her crown was not metal, but the fused skulls of 3 fallen kings, still twitching with residual consciousness, their hollow eyes weeping violet fluid. She had come to burn worlds, not out of rage, not out of vengeance, out of duty. The Vathari had been hunted to the edge of extinction by the Celestial Accord, a coalition of starfaring species who feared their ability to absorb and replicate the psychic essence of other civilizations. The Queen had lost her entire court, her children, her homeworld, reduced to ash and silence when the Accord's final weapon, the Null Song, unraveled her people's minds into screaming static. She had spent 3 centuries rebuilding, not with armies, but with grief. She had learned to wield sorrow as a blade. And now, she had found the last known outpost of the Accord's influence. A human colony on the edge of the Kalan Rift, a place so barren, so forgotten, that even the Accord had abandoned it. It was the perfect target. A world without defenders, a world without hope. She raised her hand, and the air above the dunes began to ripple. The sand beneath her feet turned to glass, then to smoke. Behind her, the obsidian vessel split open like a chrysalis, releasing a swarm of her children, slender, blue-skinned warriors with elongated limbs and eyes like fractured sapphires, each one humming with the same quiet, terrifying energy. They moved as one organism, their weapons drawn, curved blades forged from the bones of dead stars, their tips crackling with plasma that could melt through titanium in seconds. The humans raised their rifles, their pulse cannons, their jury-rigged grav grenades. They had trained for this. They had prayed for this. They had whispered their last goodbyes to families they would never see again. And then, she saw him, not the commander, not the general, not the man with the most medals or the loudest voice. She saw him standing alone, 20 paces ahead of the line, his back to the rising sun, his rifle slung over one shoulder, his helmet tucked under his arm. He was not armored like the others. His uniform was faded olive, patched at the elbows and stained with sweat and sand and something darker. Blood, maybe, from a wound he hadn't bothered to clean. He was tall, lean, with sun-browned skin and hair the color of burnt wheat, cropped short and messy, as if he'd been running his hands through it for days. His face was unremarkable. Strong jaw, tired eyes, a scar running from temple to cheekbone like a lightning bolt frozen in time. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were not filled with fear. They were not filled with hate. They were filled with recognition, as if he had been waiting for her, not as a conqueror, not as a monster, but as someone he had once known. Her hand, poised to unleash the annihilation pulse that would turn the desert into a crater the size of a small moon, trembled. The swarm behind her froze mid-step. The wind died. Even the twin suns seemed to pause, as if the universe itself had held its breath. Chiron, she whispered. The word was not spoken aloud. It vibrated in the marrow of every living thing within a mile. He didn't flinch. He didn't raise his weapon. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her. And then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into the pocket of his tunic and pulled out a small, tarnished locket. It was old, older than any human artifact on this planet. older than the colony itself. He opened it. Inside, pressed beneath cracked glass, was a single strand of hair, deep blue, shimmering faintly, still glowing with the faintest trace of bioluminescence. The queen's breath caught. It was her daughter's hair, the one she had lost, the one she had wept over for 1,000 nights, the one she had sworn to avenge, the one she had buried in the ashes of her own throne room. Chiron closed the locket. "I didn't know you'd come back," he said, his voice rough with dust and time, but clear as a bell in the silence. "I thought you were dead." She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. Behind her, the first of her warriors shifted, confused. A low, discordant hum rose from their throats. Uncertain, terrified, Chiron took a step forward. Then another. The humans behind him tensed. Someone coughed. A rifle clicked. He kept walking, toward her, toward the weapon that could erase them all. The queen's crown, still weeping violet fluid, began to glow brighter. The skulls within it screamed silently, their voices clawing at the edges of reality. She had come to end a species, to make the accord pay, to ensure no other queen would suffer as she had. And now she was being asked to remember. She remembered the night her daughter, Lysara, had slipped away from the palace gardens, chasing a glowing moth that had drifted through the crystalline trees. She remembered the way the child had laughed, bright, wild, unafraid, as she danced barefoot through the petals of the midnight bloom. She remembered the scent of her hair, sweet like crushed starfruit and ozone. She remembered the last thing Lysara had said before the null song took her. "Mother, I think I saw a human. He smiled at me. He didn't run." That was centuries ago, before the war, before the silence, before the hate. Chiron stopped 5 paces away. He didn't reach for her, didn't try to touch her, didn't beg. He just stood there holding the locket like a prayer. "You were there," he said softly. "In the garden. You were hiding behind the silver ferns. I saw you. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to scare you." The queen's lips parted. A single tear, thick and glowing like liquid sapphire, rolled down her cheek and fell onto the glassy sand. Where it landed, a small flower bloomed. Violet, fragile, trembling. "You were the one who left the fruit," she breathed. "The blue ones, the ones that glowed." Chiron nodded. "You always took them, every night. I knew it was you. I never told anyone. I thought you were a dream." She had been a dream, a ghost, a child's hallucination born of loneliness and the strange, gentle way the humans on the edge of the galaxy sometimes left offerings. Small things, things that didn't matter to them but meant everything to the lost. She had been watching him for years, not as an enemy, as a kindness. And now here he was, alive, older, worn, still smiling. The swarm behind her began to murmur. One warrior, younger than the rest, stepped forward hesitantly. "My queen." The directive. The accord must be purged. The queen didn't turn. "Do you remember what your mother used to sing to you before the silence?" The warrior blinked. I don't know. She sang about stars that fell in love with desert winds," the queen said, her voice suddenly soft, almost tender. "She said they danced together, even when no one was watching." Chiron smiled. A real one. Cracked lips, tired eyes, but real. She was right. The queen lowered her hand. The annihilation pulse faded. The obsidian vessel dimmed. The skulls in her crown went still. One by one, the Vathri warriors lowered their weapons. The humans behind Chiron didn't move, didn't breathe. They didn't understand. They never would. Chiron took another step, and then another, until he was close enough to see the tiny, fading scars on her wrists, the marks of the restraints they'd used to hold her after the null song had broken her mind. He reached out, not to strike, not to grab, but to brush his thumb gently across the back of her hand. Just once. The touch was electric. Not with power, with memory. She flinched, not from fear, but from the shock of being touched again. Not as a queen, not as a weapon, as a woman, a mother, a girl who had once danced under alien stars. Her tears fell faster now. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "I thought you were a ghost," he replied. They stood there, in the heart of a dead desert, under twin suns, two beings from worlds that should have hated each other, bound now by a single, fragile thread of kindness that had survived centuries of silence. Behind them, the desert began to change. The sand, still glassy from her earlier power, began to shimmer. Not with heat, but with color. Tiny, glowing vines, violet and blue, pushed through the surface, twisting upward like living lace. Flowers bloomed in spirals around them, their petals opening to reveal tiny, glowing insects that hummed the same lullaby the queen had once sung to her daughter. The Vathri warriors watched, confused, awed. One of them knelt, then another, then a third. The humans, still frozen, began to lower their weapons. No one spoke, no one dared. Chiron looked at her, his eyes wet. "I never stopped looking for you." She looked back, and for the first time in 300 years, she did not feel alone. They didn't kiss. They didn't embrace. They didn't make promises. They simply stood there, in the middle of a battlefield that was no longer a battlefield, and let the silence between them become something new, something sacred, something alive. It was the first time in centuries that the Queen of Vathar had felt peace. And it came not from conquest, but from a man who had left fruit for a ghost. The next morning, the Vathari fleet did not leave. Instead, they began to dig, not to destroy, to build. The humans, still half terrified, watched as the blue-skinned warriors used their plasma blades not to cut, but to carve. They shaped the glassy dunes into terraces. They redirected the underground aquifers that had long been sealed beneath the desert, using their bioorganic tech to purify the water and channel it into canals that shimmered like liquid cobalt. They planted seeds, seeds from their own dying world, seeds that grew into towering crystalline trees whose leaves sang in the wind. Chiron walked among them, not as a commander, not as a hero, as a neighbor. He helped carry stones. He shared his rations. He taught them how to make coffee from roasted desert beans, something the Vathari had never tasted, and which they declared the taste of broken stars and warm hearts. The queen watched him from the edge of the new garden, her crown now resting on a pedestal of woven vines, the skulls within it quiet, their weeping stopped. She wore a simple robe of woven desert silk, dyed with the pigment of the glowing flowers. Her hair, once a weapon, now flowed like a river of midnight, braided with tiny silver bells that chimed softly when she moved. She had not spoken to him since that first day, not in words, but she had begun to leave things for him. A single blue flower on his cot each morning. A carved stone figure of a human holding a flower, placed just outside his door. A cup of water, cooled by her own biotemperature, left on the table after he'd been working in the heat all day. He never said thank you. He never looked surprised. He just smiled. And sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, he'd press his palm to the wall of his hut, where a single strand of her hair, tucked into a tiny frame, glowed faintly against the stone. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold, the queen found him sitting alone on the highest dune, staring at the stars. He didn't turn when she approached. She sat beside him. Silence. The wind carried the song of the trees. The bells on her hair chimed softly. After a long time, he spoke. "I used to think love was something you found in a letter, or a kiss, or a promise." She didn't respond. He glanced at her. "I didn't know it could be something you carried in your pocket for 300 years. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes, once cold and endless as the void, now held the softness of a child's first dream. "I didn't know it could be something you gave back," she whispered. He reached for her hand. She let him take it, their fingers intertwined. No words, no grand declarations, just the quiet understanding that some bonds are not forged in fire. They are stitched together by small acts of kindness, by fruit left on a windowsill, by a locket kept close, by a man who never stopped believing in a ghost. Weeks passed. The desert bloomed. The Vathari, once feared as exterminators, became teachers. They taught the humans how to harvest the light from the singing trees, how to weave energy into cloth, how to heal wounds with the sap of the moon blossoms. The humans, in turn, taught them how to laugh, really laugh, how to tell jokes that made no sense, how to dance badly to music that wasn't even music, just the clatter of pots and the hum of a broken radio. One of the younger Vathari warriors, a girl named Naila, took to following Chiron everywhere. She was small, barely half his height, with eyes like twin galaxies and hair that shimmered like crushed amethyst. She asked him 1,000 questions. "Why do humans cry when they're happy? Why do you sleep with your eyes closed? Do you dream of the stars?" He answered them all, sometimes with stories, sometimes with silence, sometimes with a hug. One night, after a feast of roasted desert root and glowing berries, Naila tugged on his sleeve and led him to the center of the new garden, where the queen sat beneath the largest tree, her hair spread out like a living cloak, her crown resting beside her like a forgotten relic. Naila knelt, and then, to the shock of everyone, she reached into her pouch and pulled out a small, glowing seed. The seed of the last moon blossom, the one that only bloomed once every 100 years, and only for those who had truly been loved. She placed it in Chiron's palm. Then she looked up at him, her voice small but clear. "Mother says you saved her." Chiron swallowed. "She saved me first." Naila nodded. Then she turned to the queen. "Can I ask you something?" The queen looked at her daughter, who had been born in exile, who had grown up without a home, who had never known the sound of a mother's voice until now. "Yes," the queen whispered. Naila took a deep breath. "Will you let him be our father?" The garden fell silent. Even the trees stopped singing. The queen stared at her daughter, then at Chiron, then at the seed in his hand. She stood. Slowly, gracefully, she walked to him, and without a word, she took the seed from his palm. Then she pressed it into the earth between them. She placed her hands over it. Her hair curled around them like a cocoon. Her skin glowed brighter, until the entire garden was lit from within. And then, from the earth, a single shoot pushed upward. It grew, faster than any plant had ever grown. Vines spiraled into the sky. Flowers burst open, thousands of them, each petal a different shade of blue, each one humming with the same frequency as the queen's voice when she sang to her daughter. And in the center of it all, where the seed had been planted, a small, perfect cradle formed from living crystal and woven light. Inside it, nestled gently, was a tiny, glowing infant, blue-skinned, blue-haired, with eyes that sparkled like the first stars of a new universe. Chiron stared. The queen stared. The humans stared. The Vathari fell to their knees, not in worship, but in awe. Naila began to cry, not from sadness, from joy. The queen turned to Chiron. Her voice, when it came, was softer than the wind, stronger than any war. "They said we were monsters," she said. He looked at the child, at the garden, at the woman who had come to destroy the world and stayed to help it grow. He smiled. "We were," he said. Then he took her hand. "And now we're not." They called the place Vathar's Bloom. Not a colony, not a fortress, a home. The humans and the Vathari lived side by side, sharing meals, sharing stories, sharing grief and laughter in equal measure. The queen, once feared as the harbinger of ash, became the first mother of the new dawn. Chiron, once just a guard with a dusty uniform and a broken heart, became the keeper of the cradle, the one who rocked the child to sleep each night, who taught him to laugh, who told him stories of the stars and the desert and the man who left fruit for a ghost. The child's name was Arion. It meant the one who remembers, and he remembered everything, even the silence, even the fear, even the love that had come after. Years passed. Arion grew tall. He had his mother's grace, his father's stubbornness, and the strange, quiet humor of both. He could make flowers bloom with a touch. He could make a man cry with a single joke. He could sing the lullaby his grandmother had once sung, and when he did, the stars above would dim, not out of fear but out of reverence. One evening, when Arion was 16, he stood beside his parents on the highest dune, watching the twin suns set. His mother was older now. Her hair had streaks of silver woven through the blue. Her skin, once flawless, bore the faintest lines of time. His father's hair was mostly gray. His scar had faded to a whisper. Arion held his mother's hand in one, his father's in the other. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "Why did you both wait so long?" The queen looked at Chiron. Chiron looked at her, and then they both smiled. "Because," Chiron said, "some things aren't meant to be rushed. They're meant to be remembered," his mother added. Arion looked up at the stars, and for the first time he didn't see enemies. He didn't see monsters. He saw a sky full of possibilities, and he knew he was going to make sure the universe never forgot them again. The Vathari fleet, once a weapon of annihilation, became a beacon. Ships from other worlds came not to fight but to learn. They brought seeds. They brought songs. They brought children. And every year, on the anniversary of the day the queen had lowered her hand, the people of Vathar's Bloom gathered beneath the great singing tree. They lit lanterns made of living crystal. They sang the old lullaby, and they left a single blue fruit on the altar, just as a man once had, for a ghost. The queen never spoke of her past. Chiron never spoke of his. But every night, before they slept, they would sit together, hand in hand, and watch the stars. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, you could hear the faintest echo of laughter, a child's, a mother's, and a man who had never stopped believing in miracles. And the desert, once dead, was now the most alive place in the galaxy. But peace, like glass, is beautiful only until it shatters. 7 years after the bloom began to flourish, the sky cracked again, not with the silent grace of the queen's arrival, but with the jagged scream of warships descending like iron vultures. They bore no banners, no emblems, only scorched hulls and weapons humming with unstable chronoton cores. These were not the celestial accord. They were worse. They were the remnant, survivors of the accord's collapse, fanatics who had spent decades hunting the queen across the void, believing her very existence to be a contagion that threatened the purity of cosmic order. Their leader emerged not from a ship, but from the sand itself. He stepped out of a dune as if the desert had birthed him. A gaunt, pale figure clad in a suit of fossilized starflesh, his eyes hollow pits filled with swirling black data. His name was Xyrus, once a high archivist of the Accord, now a self-styled prophet of silence. He carried no weapon. He didn't need one. His voice alone could unravel minds. Kael Vathar, he intoned, though he looked not at the queen, but at Chiron. You stand among abominations. You have fathered a hybrid, an insult to every law of nature. Surrender them, or watch your world unmake itself. Chiron stepped forward, but the queen placed a hand on his arm. Her skin had grown paler since Arion's birth, her glow dimmer, as if part of her life force had poured into her son. She faced Xyrus with eyes that had seen galaxies die. We are not abominations, she said. We are evolution. Xyrus smiled, a thin, cruel thing. Then let us test that theory. He raised his hand, not to attack, to reveal. From within his coat, he pulled a small, writhing creature. A larval Vathari, half-formed, its blue skin mottled with gray rot, cried out in a voice that was both infant and scream. This, Xyrus said, is what your union produced in secret, a stillborn, a failure. The universe rejects your love. The crowd gasped. Even Naila recoiled. Arion stared, wide-eyed, at the malformed child. His brother, he realized with dawning horror. The queen staggered. For the first time since the desert bloomed, fear flickered in her eyes. Chiron, however, did not flinch. He walked straight to Xyrus, ignoring the guards that materialized from the sand like shadows. He knelt before the larval infant, and gently took it into his arms. It's not a failure, he said softly. It's sick. Then, before anyone could react, he turned to the queen. The bloom's heart tree. Its sap. It healed me when the acid rain burned my lungs. Can it heal this one? The queen hesitated. The heart tree's sap was sacred. To use it on an imperfect child was forbidden in the old ways. But Chiron's eyes held hers. And in them, she saw not judgment, but compassion. The same compassion that had once left blue fruit on a windowsill in the dead of night. Yes, she whispered. Together, they carried the larval child to the heart of the garden, where the great singing tree pulsed with light. The queen pressed her palm to its trunk. Chiron laid the infant at its roots. The tree shuddered. Vines curled around the child. Light poured into its veins. Xyrus watched silent for once. The crowd held its breath. For hours nothing happened. Then movement. The gray rot receded. The skin brightened to a soft cerulean. The eyes opened. Not mismatched, not broken, but luminous, full of quiet wonder. The child cooed, and the tree sang louder than it ever had. Xyrus's face twisted in fury. You corrupt the divine order. No, Chiron said, standing. We expand it. That night, Xyrus vanished, but not before planting a seed of doubt in the minds of many. Some humans began to whisper, what if he's right? What if Arion is the exception, not the rule? Even among the Vathari, elders questioned whether merging with humans diluted their essence. Tensions simmered. Suspicion took root. Worse, Arion began to change. His laughter, once bright, grew distant. He would disappear for hours into the dunes, returning with sand in his hair and a faraway look in his eyes. One morning, Chiron found him standing at the edge of a deep fissure that hadn't been there the day before. A crack in the earth that pulsed with the same violet energy as the queen's tears. Father, Arion said without turning. The desert is dreaming again. What does that mean? Chiron asked. Arion finally looked at him. His eyes had shifted. Not to black, not to blue, but to something in between, swirling like storm clouds over an ocean. It remembers the Null Song. Chiron's blood ran cold. The Null Song wasn't just a weapon. It was a sentient plague, a psychic echo that fed on grief and erased identity. If it was returning, it meant someone had reactivated it. And there was only one place it could be broadcast from: the ruins of the original Accord relay station, buried deep beneath the northern dunes. A place Chiron had explored years ago and sealed with a gravity lock. That same night, the lock was broken. Chiron and the Queen raced to the ruins, Arion insisting on coming with them. Inside the crumbling chamber, they found Xyrus. Not alone, but fused with the relay core, his body half machine, half madness. His voice now a chorus of dead stars. "I couldn't destroy your love," he rasped. "So I will make it consume itself." He activated the Null Song, not at full power, just enough. It didn't erase. It distorted. The Queen clutched her head as memories fractured. Chiron's face blurred, replaced by the ghosts of her dead consorts. Chiron saw the Queen not as his love, but as the destroyer she had once been, her hands dripping with the blood of billions. Arion fell to his knees, screaming as his hybrid mind was torn between two species, two histories, two truths. "You will forget each other," Xyrus hissed. "And in that forgetting, you will destroy what you built." But then, something unexpected. Arion stood, not as a boy, not as a hybrid, but as something new. He placed his hands on the ground, and he began to sing. Not the lullaby, not the tree's song, but a song of his own, one made of human laughter and vapory hums, of desert winds and the clang of coffee pots, of a locket and a strand of blue hair. The Null Song faltered. It had no defense against joy, because the Null Song fed on loss. But Arion was born of found things. Xyrus shrieked as his machine body overloaded. The relay core exploded not in fire, but in light. The desert trembled. The fissure sealed itself. When the dust settled, Xyrus was gone. And in his place stood the larval child, now healed, now whole, now gazing at Arion with reverence. The Queen collapsed into Chiron's arms. "I remembered," she whispered. "I remembered your eyes." He kissed her forehead. "I remembered your voice." They returned to the bloom not as survivors, but as reminders that love isn't the absence of danger, but the courage to rebuild in its shadow. Years later, Arion would become the first ambassador of the Third Accord, a fragile alliance of humans, Vathari, and even former remnant who had seen the light and chosen to stay. He would travel the stars, not with weapons, but with seeds from the singing tree and stories of a desert that learned to bloom. And every time he left, his parents would stand on the highest dune, hands clasped, watching him go, not with fear, but with pride. Because the greatest twist of all wasn't in the arrival of enemies, or the return of ancient horrors. It was this, that the thing meant to destroy them, the Queen's grief, Chiron's loneliness, Arion's duality, became the very foundation of a new kind of universe. One where monsters became mothers, where guards became fathers, where deserts became gardens, and where love, once a whisper in the dark, became a song loud enough to drown out the silence of the stars. The stars did not forget. They never do, but they began to listen. After Xyrus fell, the galaxy didn't cheer. It didn't celebrate with fireworks or parades of warships. It watched, quietly, cautiously, as if afraid that joy, once tasted, might vanish like mist under twin suns. But the bloom did not fade. It grew. Arion's song, his strange, beautiful harmony of human laughter and Vathari hums, rippled across the void. Ships that once hunted the Queen now came to listen, not to conquer, not to study, but to heal. A child from the frozen moon of Vale, 7, born mute after a psychic storm, spoke her first word when she heard Arion sing. Mother, a Vathari elder, who had spent centuries refusing to touch another soul after losing her entire brood, reached out and held the hand of a human child who had lost his family in the early raids. She wept. He hugged her. And for the first time in 300 years, the old ones began to sing again, not the lullabies of loss, but the songs of belonging. The Queen, once feared as the harbinger of ash, became known across the galaxy as Lysara the Unbroken, not for her power, but for her choice. She chose love over vengeance. She chose silence over war. She chose to stay. Chiron never became a king. He never wore a crown. He never wanted one. He became the keeper of the first bloom. Every morning, before the suns rose, he walked the garden with his cane, carved from the heart tree's fallen branch, and checked on the vines, the singing flowers, the children who now played among them. He taught them how to plant seeds with their hands, how to listen to the wind, how to laugh when they fell. The queen walked beside him, her hair now fully silver blue, her skin lined with the quiet beauty of time. She no longer needed her crown. The people of the bloom wove crowns for her from living vines and glowing petals, and she wore them without ceremony, as if they were just another kind of hug. Arion returned home every solstice. He brought stories from distant worlds. He brought new seeds. He brought babies. One of them, tiny, with skin the color of twilight and eyes that changed hue with their mood, was named Terra. She was the first child born of a human mother and a Vathari father who had never met before the ceremony. She cried when she was born, and then, when Arion held her and sang, she stopped. She smiled, and the entire garden bloomed in response. The queen wept, Chiron smiled, and for the first time since the desert was born, the twin suns set in perfect harmony, one fading into the other, as if they had learned to share the sky. Years passed. The bloom became a sanctuary, a school, a home, a miracle. The Accord, now reborn as the Concord of Echoes, officially recognized Vathar's bloom as the first nation of the new dawn. No longer a colony, no longer a treaty, a sovereign world. And when the time came, for Chiron, for the queen, for Arion, for all of them, the galaxy gathered, not to fight, not to witness a coronation, but to witness a wedding, not between two races, not between two species, but between two souls who had spent a lifetime learning how to love again. The ceremony was simple. No grand halls, no alien priests, just the heart tree, its branches arching over them like a living cathedral. The queen wore a gown woven from moonblossom silk, threaded with strands of her own hair, now silver as starlight. Chiron wore the same faded uniform he'd worn on the day she came to destroy him, but now it was stitched with tiny blue flowers, each one glowing softly. Arion stood beside them, holding Terra in his arms. Naila, now a master of the bloom's light weaving, sang the old lullaby, not as a memory, but as a promise. And when the queen reached for Chiron's hand, she did not speak. She didn't need to. He didn't either. They simply pressed their foreheads together, and the heart tree sang, louder than ever. The flowers bloomed in spirals. The sand beneath them turned to crystal. The sky above shimmered, not with stars, but with thousands of tiny, glowing lanterns, released by children from 100 worlds, each one carrying a name. A mother, a father, a child, a friend. They floated upward, and for the first time in recorded history, the stars above Vathar's bloom did not twinkle. They danced. The queen looked up and whispered, "We were never meant to be alone." Chiron squeezed her hand. "No," he said, "we were meant to be together." They kissed, not as queen and soldier, not as alien and human, but as two people who had loved across silence, through grief, through fear, through time. And when they pulled apart, the entire world exhaled. The ground trembled, not with war, but with joy. The trees sang in harmony. The children laughed. And Terra, still in Arion's arms, reached out her tiny hand and touched the air. A single blue flower bloomed in her palm. The queen smiled. Chiron wiped a tear. And Arion, looking out over the sea of faces, human, Vathari, and those who had come from places no map could name, said quietly, "This is what peace sounds like." It wasn't silence. It wasn't victory. It was music. It was laughter. It was the sound of a desert learning how to bloom. 5 years later, Chiron sat on his porch, wrapped in a blanket woven from desert silk, watching the suns rise. He was old now. His hair was white. His hands trembled. But his eyes, those same tired, kind eyes, still held the same quiet light. The queen sat beside him, her silver blue hair now almost entirely white, her skin thin as parchment, but her smile as bright as the first day she had lowered her weapon. They didn't speak much anymore. They didn't need to. Arion had become the chancellor of the Concord. He traveled often, carrying the bloom's message across the stars. Naila led the Council of Light. Terra, now a young woman with eyes that shifted from violet to gold depending on her mood, was studying the ancient songs of the Null Song, not to destroy them, but to turn them into lullabies. The garden thrived. The desert sang. And every morning, just before dawn, the queen would rise, slowly, carefully, and place a single blue fruit on the table beside Chiron's chair. He never ate it. He never needed to. He just looked at it and smiled. One morning he didn't wake up. He was found sitting in his chair, his hands folded, his face peaceful, the last blue fruit still resting beside him. The queen did not cry. She sat beside him and held his hand and sang. Not the lullaby, not the song of the tree, but the song he had taught her, the one he hummed when he thought no one was listening. The song of the desert wind, of a man who never stopped believing in ghosts, of a love that didn't need words. The bloom fell silent, not in grief, in reverence. For 3 days the trees did not sing, the flowers did not bloom, the wind did not stir. Then, on the 4th morning, the heart tree shed its oldest leaf. It drifted down, and landed gently on Chiron's chest. And from the leaf, a single glowing seed. The queen took it, and placed it in the earth beside him. She knelt, and whispered, "You taught me how to love." She kissed his forehead, and stood, and turned to the people gathered around them, and said simply, "He is not gone. He is becoming." And as if in answer, the ground beneath them trembled, not with force, but with life. A shoot broke through the soil, small, delicate, blue, and from it, a single vine curled upward, twisting, reaching, growing, until it wrapped around Chiron's chair, his hand, the blue fruit, the heart tree's roots. And then, gently, impossibly, it began to glow, with his light, with her light, with the light of everything they had built. Years passed. The bloom grew larger. New worlds joined. New songs were written. Terra became the first human Vathari ambassador to the core systems. Arion, now gray-haired and wise, returned home every year to sit with the vine that had grown around his father's chair. It was no longer a vine. It was a tree, smaller than the heart tree, but brighter. Its leaves were shaped like hands. Its fruit glowed with the warmth of a human heartbeat. And when you held one, you didn't hear words. You felt memories. You felt laughter. You felt a man who had once stood alone on a desert battlefield and chose to reach out. The queen lived another century. She watched her grandchildren grow. She taught her great-grandchildren how to plant seeds. She told them stories of the man who left fruit for a ghost. And when her time came, she did not die. She unfolded. On the night of the twin solstice, she walked to the base of Chiron's tree. She lay down beside it. She took the last blue fruit from her pocket, the one she had kept since the day he died. She placed it in her palm, and closed her eyes, and sang. The tree responded. Its roots lifted gently, its branches bent low, and when the first light of dawn touched her skin, she dissolved, not into ash, not into dust, but into light, into song, into the bark of Chiron's tree. Her hair became its leaves, her voice its hum, her love its roots, and from that day on the tree bore fruit every year. Not one, not two, but 3. 1 blue, 1 gold, 1 silver, and if you held them close, you could hear 2 voices, 1 rough, warm, human, 1 soft, ancient, alien, and together, they whispered the same thing over and over. I found you. I never let go. I'm here. The galaxy still has wars. It still has fear. It still has silence. But now, when children are born in the dark, when mothers cry because they think they're alone, they are told a story of a desert, of a soldier, of a queen, of a love that didn't end. It just learned how to grow. And if you listen very, very carefully, on quiet nights under the twin suns, you can still hear them, laughing, singing, waiting for you to join them. And when you do, you'll find a seat beside them, and a fruit, and a song, and you'll know you were never meant to be alone. You were meant to bloom, and you will.